Welcome everyone to the National Citizens Alliance live Q&A on mass immigration and its impact on the Canadian economy. I'd like to welcome John Meyer. He's with us today. He's an expert in immigration. He's been working for 45 years in the area of population and environment. He's also studied social metrics, which determine progress within our society. Thank you, John, for joining us today.
Okay, looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is a critical issue, everyone. Basically, the NCA position is that this mass immigration is harming the Canadian economy. It's hurting us socially, environmentally, in almost every sense. And it's actually, as John will elaborate later on, it's actually hurting the countries where these people are coming from. It's actually encouraging them to not have proper population control within their countries. Also, we're taking some of the best people from their country, which is harming their country. So it's all hypocrisy, and we're going to get into this today. The NCA position is that we want a temporary ban on immigration and a substantial reduction. In addition, we would provide incentives to increase the fertility, larger families for traditional families, Canadian families. That's something we would support. And hi, Ian. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to turn to John here. He can do an introduction, and then I have 5 research papers. I'm going to highlight some points tonight from them. I think everyone needs to know. We want your questions tonight, so please share your comments, your feedback on this important subject. And I'm just going to add one other point before we shift to John here. I want everyone to know, if you look at the immigration statistics for Canada, since the 1960s, there's been constant mass immigration, and it's been building from decade to decade. It doesn't matter which government gets in, there's still mass immigration. Even under Harper had historic mass immigration. In 2015, it was up to 271,000, not including illegal migrants. Under Mulroney, it was historic mass immigration to 250,000 plus, regardless of whether it was in a boom period or a recession period. So just everyone remember that. This is not restricted to the Liberal Party. It's all the establishment parties. They're supporting the mass immigration. And I'm going to turn it to John now to just shed light on this issue.
Yeah, hi. Pleasure to be here. I look at myself as a techno-populist. I like to see terms well explained, and I like to see national focus on the welfare of Canadians and the land. Being a member and president of Canadians for a Sustainable Society, we want to see growth addressed, the whole issue of growth. That we can't continue growing, consuming, and populating this planet more heavily than we are already. So on the issue of mass immigration, what is mass immigration? First, let's look at what balanced immigration is. Balanced immigration would be the same number of people coming in as leaving. In Canada's case, that would be about 50,000, 60,000 a year. Right now, we have mass immigration. It's designed to expand the commercial economy. It's not designed to increase per capita incomes. It's not designed to, with any metrics of well-being of the people and the land in mind. It's simply designed to expand the commercial economy. And you hear it 20 times a day in the media. We need a growing economy. It's good for the economy. Well, their version of the economy is not well-being for individuals. In the last 40 years, Canada's, let me go back. In the early 60s, Canada's level of equality was number 2 in the world. In other words, the There was a huge middle class, a few poor people, and a few rich people. Very, very high level of equality. In the last, since then, we've sunk down to the mid-20s. So we now have very high levels of income polarization. In Ontario, we've created 5 times, or the percentage of minimum wage jobs in the province has quintupled since the mid-90s. And we're focusing on the number of jobs, expanding the economy, not the quality of jobs, not the cost of housing. We're focusing on building more housing, not the quality, the affordability of housing. So everything is attached to growth, and that benefits certain specific groups in the country: developers, land speculators, cheap labor employers, media corporations. They're tied to the size of their local market and the kind of people who advertise in their publications. So basically, that's how I look at it. Canada's population on its own would basically stabilize on its own very quickly. We're growing very slowly. There wouldn't be a problem maintaining our population at all. I think that's not an issue. So, but we just don't need to have a larger population.
Fair enough, John. And Michelle, thank you for your question there. We're going to get to that. I just want to touch on a few points from this report here. Michelle's asking John, and we're going to get to this in a second, the point of the best and brightest leaving third world countries only to join our country is a huge topic. It's actually quite greedy of us as an economy. Why do we need them more than their own homelands? 100%, Michelle. We're going to address that, and you're 100% right on that. I have this report here. I have about 5 reports here. They make some excellent points, and tonight is about informing the Canadian people on this issue. As John said, the media, the establishment parties in Ottawa are pushing a dishonest, false narrative on immigration, and that the idea that we need immigration in order to be prosperous, in order for the well-being of the Canadian people. That is flat out false, and we're going to address that tonight. This actual paper here, it says here that economic growth does not require increases in population. For our country to grow, it does not require an increase in population. And this is from another point here from the Economic Council of Canada. The fastest growth in real per capita income occurred at times when net migration was 0 or even negative. Look at that. The net migration was 0 or even negative. It just shows that this migration, the immigration issue is, like John said, it's all catering these globalist special interests in Canada. And we're going to talk about that further. And I'm sorry to say, these establishment parties are stringed to them. They're getting money from them. And it's about using the Canadian people. It's really, I'm going to be quite blunt about it. It's very disgusting what's going on. It's harming our people. It's harming our environment. It's harming the places where they're coming from. It's harming the world as a whole. So we need to rise up, Canadians. So here's another point everyone needs to consider. And this was a report on the OECD. There was no real correlation whatsoever between population growth and economic growth in its 22 member countries. Zero correlation between population growth and economic growth, everyone. I'm going to get down here to another point everyone needs to consider. And this was from StatsCan, and this was back in 2001. They said, given Canada's current age distribution, the overall population aging, it is unavoidable. Immigration has limited impact on the population aging. Everyone remember that, because that's used to justify mass immigration. They say, oh, our population is aging. We need these new immigrants coming in. There's no scientific evidence that these new immigrants coming in will make any difference on our aging population. Just remember that one too. Another thing everyone needs to consider here is that with the aging population in Canada, there's going to be an echo generation. The echo generation are the kids of the boomers who are going to have their own kids. So we're going to have a rebound from the boomers' kids. Remember that. Another thing here is we're going to have a labor market surpluses before we get to the labor market shortages. Remember this, everyone. Right now, the unemployment rate in Canada is around 6%, and that's completely undervalued. So it doesn't make sense that we have a labor shortage in Canada when we have at least 8% unemployed, right? Where's the labor shortage? So that's another point everyone needs to consider. And the reason the unemployment number is not accurate, because when people stop looking for jobs, they're no longer considered unemployed. And another thing, I'm going to get to Michelle. Michelle's comment here. Michelle, excellent point. You know, what's going on with the mass immigration, Michelle, and you hit it on here. This is complete hypocrisy of the government in Ottawa and the whole establishment, the deep state. Because what they're doing is they're taking people from these countries which are completely overpopulated, which is only encouraging them to produce more in those countries, which, as John has pointed out in one of his articles, it's causing more environmental harm. Then they're bringing them to our country, and our country is getting overpopulated. But you know what's worse here is that there's actually a reverse brain drain. We're taking bright people from these countries, right? But it's hurting their countries because they need them to deal with their own issues. But because we have mass immigration in Canada, there's a number of Canadians who are leaving for the U.S. So we're getting a reverse brain drain here. We have a lot nurses, doctors, other professionals leaving for the U.S. market. So the immigration is hurting us in that sense. We're losing some of our best professionals. And John, do you want to touch on any of those points?
Oh, sure, a few. Political donations. We have very poor stats in this. In Canada, if you look at the U.S., they've got all kinds of stats. They know what groups, what interests are giving to their political parties. We don't know that here, with the exception of one small study done by Prof at York called McDermott. And he looked at the donations to, in the municipal elections, he found that a huge percentage of the successful politicians, elected politicians, got 90 or 100% of their money from developers. So guess which way they vote on things. This whole, I just want to make a point about the completely detached rationales for mass immigration and constantly expanding the population. You have, I think it's Saunders, I think that's his name, writes for the Globe. One of the reasons he wanted to have 100 million people in this country, which is triple our population now, is he wanted Canada to project power around the world. He wanted us to have aircraft carrier fleets to project power, I don't know why, around the world. And he also felt that it would also help the media corporations because they're having a rough time now. But there's just a complete disconnect with the world that most people live in. If you look at Canadian productivity, you hear this, not so much anymore, but For the last 40 years, people have been complaining, pointing out that Canadians have very low rates of productivity increase. And that's because we don't invest in our people. That's why our incomes have stagnated over 4 or 5 decades. So productivity is a function of investing in your people. If you submerge the country in a tidal wave of cheap labor, there's no incentive to increase productivity. So that's a fundamental problem. The aging issue has been brought up time and again, but the official parties won't say this, certainly not the Conservatives, because aging is inevitable. It's inevitable. The world is aging. Canada is aging. As we started off, as population levels off, aging is absolutely inevitable. Immigration doesn't change that because their rate, their aging profile of the immigrant flow, that profile is basically very close to that of Canadians. And you would have to have immense levels of immigration that would go on forever if you want to stay ahead of aging. And it's going to happen anyway, so that's we need to adapt to it. And I just wanted to say that the quality of jobs, labor shortages should contribute to the improving jobs, because people simply won't take low-paying jobs if there are better ones available. But what has happened, besides mass immigration, is the temporary foreign worker program, where we have something on the order of 350 or 500,000 people working in the country, many of them at low-wage jobs that Canadians won't accept. And these jobs are tax negative. In other words, to be tax positive, a job should be running somewhere in the neighborhood of the low 40,000s a year. If you create a lot of low-paying jobs, you have fiscal imbalance. You cannot support a high level of social safety net, social services on the backs of working poor.
Excellent point, John. Excellent. So everyone, this I'm going to refer to the Economic Council of Canada. This report came out in 1991. These recommendations on mass immigration were completely ignored by the establishment parties. Completely ignored. They just went on with their mass immigration, despite the findings of the Economic Council of Canada 1991 report. It came out in 1990 to 1991. Please look this up. I'm going to highlight a few points from this report. Basically, the first one they say is that the net economic benefits of immigration to Canadians is very, very small, around 1%. And this 1% didn't consider the environmental factors. If they had, immigration might have been discovered to be a significant cost to Canadians. So that's finding number one. It should be noted as well, immigration has not been necessary for our country's population growth, nor for its prosperity. For much of Canada's history, natural increase, not immigration, has driven the growth of population. There is no sustained correlation between immigration and economic growth. Just remember that. And this is another report that says that. And here, the scale economies are virtually zero. When an immigration-induced population increase of 1 million, the national average productivity would rise a mere 0.11%. Can you believe that, everyone? And the current government is actually bringing in 1 million new immigrants over 3 years. We're going to have very little increase in our productivity as a country. Yeah, we're going to have all this welfare drain, and we're going to go into that. Another point, a popular belief is that immigrants benefit the economy because they are different from native-born residents. And I'm sorry to say, everyone, this is just nonsense. There is no theoretical or analytical research that examines potential spillover effects from immigrants to hosts. Indirect evidence suggests that there are no significant spillover effects. Again, here's another point. Immigrants pay more taxes than they consume in services. That's the only time when Canada will benefit from immigrants coming to a country. As John said.
That's not correct.
No, but it's only if they pay more taxes.
Yeah.
And what's happening in Canada, everyone, the immigrants coming in are consuming more services than they're paying taxes, as John said. So it's draining our country. It's draining our resources.
30 billion a year.
30 billion a year. Here's another point, everyone. The current government was pushing diversity on everyone. Well, according to the Economic Council of Canada, diversity can produce positive and negative results. Basic psychological research shows that both very simple and very complex environments will have relatively negative effects on skill development compared with effects of moderately complex learning environment. The same is true of adapting social institutions to meet the needs of a culturally more diverse population. Caution is needed. Caution is needed was the advice of the Economic Council of Canada. Diversity is not our strength. It's draining us. Even the Economic Council of Canada warned about it back in 1991. Can you believe that? And now it's getting pushed on us. This is all nonsense, everyone. So I'm gonna make it clear to you. I want to thank what's his name, Dan Murray from Immigration Watch. He supplied a lot of material to me, and on his website, Immigration Watch, he's calculated that immigration is costing the Canadian taxpayers up to $35 billion a year. And that's including all the welfare system, the social assistance, and all that. $35 billion a year, John.
Yeah, I think that study was done by Herb Grubel.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's the net of what the government spends on immigrants versus the taxes that the immigrants contribute. So that's a net 30 billion. And to me, that's low. I don't have the study to back it up.
Okay.
Because if, as I think is certain, the number of jobs created, low-paying jobs that have been created, are due to an overabundance of cheap labor coming into the country. They've held down the productivity of Canadians, and so it's not just the immigrants that are tax negative, it's the Canadians that are held in low-paying jobs that are tax negative. So I think you could increase the 30 billion dramatically into the overall effect. But again, that has to be studied. But that mechanism is there. I wanted to mention one thing on the difference between immigrant and growth of the economy and per capita, the impact on per capita income. Germany did a study. As you know, they took in 1 million immigrants, many of them Syrian, in the last couple of years. That increased their population by 1.2%. Okay. Now, the German study showed that because of this migration, this inflow, the German economy increased by 0.6%. So what that means is, okay, the economy grew, going to make some developers and speculators very happy. Rents go up, cost of labor goes down or stagnates. But what that indicates is that per capita income dropped by 0.6% because you had 1.2% more people, but income only went up 0.6%. So per capita income actually declined. That's what that study illustrates. So a bigger economy doesn't benefit most people.
Yeah, and that's not including all the social, cultural impacts and let's say, criminal aspects of it, right,
Mhm.
John?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't have good data on that. I'm going to Europe in a
Sure.
couple of weeks, and I'm going to be looking at this specifically
Sure.
because there's a lot of discussion of this, and I want to find out what the real story is. But certainly, I think in the States, the likelihood of, and now we're talking, I think it was illegal immigrants, they're about 2.5 times more likely to be involved in criminal activities than the population of the States as a whole. We, of course, don't have stats on that in Canada because we don't have anything on the impacts of immigration for a reason. There's a reason for that, and anything in most respects, any analysis of immigration will not be flattering to the levels that we have now.
Exactly. John, it's a minor issue. Your video screen is black, but we can hear you. So
Okay.
I'm going to turn to some of these questions. So if you want to look at your video,
Okay.
but please don't disconnect because we can hear you.
Okay.
We're going to turn to Ian here. He said 50% of all jobs will be gone because of technology advancement and automation. Yeah, that's at the high end, Ian. That's with artificial intelligence, robotics, everyone. There's been studies that come out that show that we could lose up to 50% of our workforce. Meanwhile, we got steady mass immigration into our country. This is nonsensical, everyone. And it's very clear what's happening. These globalist parties in Canada are straying to these special interests, these globalist interests, these bankers, these real estate people, these low-skilled employers, and they're catering to them at the expense of the Canadian people. And they keep pushing the narrative that diversity is our strength, that immigration is good for the economy. This is all nonsense. The Canadian people are being doped, absolutely doped, and treated with contempt. So let's wake up, everyone. We're going to shift here. Josie, thank you for joining us tonight. Josie says, all these immigrants entering the country, what do they have to offer Canada? But to burden Canadians to poverty, immigration should be for those who can help Canada grow, not to bring the country drained. Excellent. We don't want people coming here, Josie, and exploiting us, living off our welfare systems, sending all their money back home. There are some good immigrants that come here that work hard. They integrate. That's great. The problem we're facing, Josie, is there's no correlation between our prosperity as a people and immigration. The bottom line is we don't need immigration. We don't need it. All we need, even our current fertility rate, if we continue with our current fertility rate, in 2086, I read a report, we would still be at 25 million.
Yeah, I think that will decline slower than that.
Yeah, it's going to decline slowly, but if we provide incentives to increase our traditional families, problem solved. The narrative is that we need mass immigration. This is complete false. It's harming the world. It's harming the environment. It's harming our environment. It's harming our people. It's only benefiting a few rich special interests that are tied to these parties. That's it.
And if we did want to help the world, I'm not sure if it's my camera or if have you blacked me out, or is it my camera? But regardless of the technical glitch, the fact is that we spend about $30 billion a year on subsidizing immigrants, but we spend $5 billion a year on foreign aid. So if we wanted to help the world, we would be spending more overseas and not bringing the issue here, where it's vastly more expensive to do anything. But the fact is that that this flow of people makes huge profits. I mean, let me give you one statistic, which I think it was 1961, the amount of mortgages held by banks, residential mortgages was a certain figure, which I don't have. But in 2016, that figure had grown by 1,475 times, not percentage, times. And there's inflation in there and everything. But in any case, the banks have made billions and billions and billions and billions on residential mortgages, and probably a similar amount to developers and speculators. That's the magnitude. That's the magnitude of the money, and that's why they want it. That's why it's so critical to them. That's why they're so powerful.
Yeah, so they're making like all these new mortgages coming in, like you're saying, the low-paying jobs, but also on the flip side, you're getting more votes for these establishment parties, right? Depending who's, it doesn't matter which party, they're bringing mass immigrants in, and people tend to vote for the country that brought you into the country.
That's
so
right.
They're picking up all these. No, it's not just the liberals. Yeah. Look, the mass immigration has been. It doesn't matter which government's in power.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, John.
Well, I was just going to say it's frustrating. Okay, you've got the liberals and the conservatives. Basically, they're the corporate parties. They get money from the same places, the same interest groups and that kind of thing. But then you've got issue-specific parties like the Green Party and the NDP. The Green Party should have an extremely well-defined population, sustainable society, immigration policy, a coherent policy, because if you want to be sustainable, if you want to be environmentally sustainable, you have to have one of these. They don't, because touching population or immigration in Canada is absolutely toxic. They'd never be mentioned again in the media. The NDP, okay, where is the living wage fight? Where are they going to bat for the average Canadian as a whole? It's not there. And this is the thing that bothers me. I don't mind the liberals and conservatives, being what they are, which is just corporate parties. That's fine. But the issue-specific people should be, to be effective, to deliver on what their theoretical promise is, they have to integrate an immigration policy with their basic platform, and they haven't done that.
Yeah. So that's where we come in, John, because we have that in our policy. This is just common sense, everyone, and this is about the Canadian people, our well-being, our prosperity. We're not driven by a special interest, right? We're not against corporations, but we don't like the globalism agenda, and we will not adhere to that. This is about the Canadian people. This is our country. So we need to fight back. And Bruce says if Canadians were paid more, they would have more children. Obviously, that would be a good incentive, John? If there was, because I know back in pre-Confederation, there was a massive incentives for large Quebecois families, and they were very effective. They had fertility rates up to 5.65.
That's right. That's a fundamental. If you look at kids today, they come out of school, they're graduating later, they're staying in school. A lot of them are hiding because there aren't jobs out there, so they're hiding in school. When they come out, you go into a city where either the cost of housing or rent is ridiculous. They can't afford it. How are you going to bring up kids? How are you going to find your partner if you're working temp jobs? If you've got low income, if you're barely scraping by, how are you going to put this all together and have kids? And where you would want to have kids. And in the cities, there's a net migration of Canadians out of the cities. So 100% of the growth of our major cities now is by immigration. So that's where the demand is coming from to drive up the prices. And you've got congestion, air quality, lack of green space. These are not environments where people want to have, or can afford to have children.
Yeah, fair enough. And Michelle says there's a long history of why Canadians are not having enough children, and economics are only part of it. And also, Michelle, like there's social pressure, like women have to work, right? And there's all that push to get them out of the home. John?
Yep.
That's probably not conducive to having a large family, is it?
No, well, I'm not for large families, but if you want to have one or two children,
Yes.
that's great. But you have to have the government support. You have to have the leave, the maternity leave, to allow parents to properly look after their kids. And you have to have daycare. Daycare is cripplingly expensive. You've got to have green space. You've got to have places where healthy environments where parents want their kids to grow up, and we're destroying that.
Yep, a good point. And Gloria goes on to say Canadians are not having as many children due to high taxes. Both parents need to work, and there are very few women who can stay home and raise a large family.
Yeah,
John?
That to me, I mean, that's an issue to me. It's called disposable income. With very low disposable income, you really can't afford to have kids. But if the higher, unless you're on welfare or something, with higher incomes, more government support, and which means taxes, you can have kids. But let me say a word about taxes. There are taxes where the government takes your money away. Okay, everybody's familiar with that. Then there's hidden tax that you can't avoid paying, and that's cost of housing. That's a tax on you. You cannot avoid paying high rents, high mortgage costs. That's a tax. It is unavoidable, and it's built in not only to what you pay directly, but it's built into the cost of the goods you buy. The property cost goes into all the goods, their cost, the business's cost of operation. So there's a hidden tax there, and it's huge.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. And just getting back to Gloria, because right now the taxes, average Canadians paying about 42.5% of their income on taxes. John, that's almost 50% of their income.
Yeah, no,
also, the majority of Canadians don't really see a lot from those taxes. So, and then we bring this back to immigration and all these immigrants, and a lot of them are on welfare and the benefits, and it's just insane. I can't believe, I can't fault the frustration of most Canadians on what's happening to their country. And, I just want to be clear that we support substantial incentives, and we're going to be quantifying them in the coming months on increasing the traditional families. And right now they're overburdened in many, many, many senses. So thank you, Michelle and Gloria, for your feedback on that. I'm going to turn to Stephen Curry here. He says a million new immigrants plus there are 86 relatives, each most of which are at retirement age. John, this has been happening for years. This is why our hospital wait times are so high. The country is in so much debt. So, it's not just the immigrants, and then they bring their parents, their grandparents. John.
Yeah, that's a factor. That's definitely a factor. But once you allow the people in the country, you have to take care of them. I mean, you can't have old people dying on the streets.
Exactly.
So once they're in, they're going to get it, whether they paid a cent to any kind of support, tax support for their programs. So that's this daisy chain is not the way. You see, the government wants, or the immigration promoters, let's put it that way, immigration profiteers. How's that for a term? Immigration profiteers, they promote immigration. Oh, it's going to take care of aging. But on the other side, from the other side of their mouth, they're saying, well, we've got to let in the aged relatives. And that just totally cancels out the validity of any position. I mean, the media, a journalist would have a field day with immigration. But if you had a field day as a journalist, you would not be working for a media corporation in Canada, unfortunately.
Because they're tied to those banks, they're tied to the special interests that are benefiting, right?
Yeah, and that's right. And if you look at the pattern of advertising that goes on in the Canadian media, they say the Toronto Star, massively pro-immigration, high rates of immigration. And if you look at where they get their money from, now this is going back 5 years or so before their finances really started to hit the dumper. But if you look if you want to find out who is paying the tune at a media corporation? Look at the ads that they're running. The Toronto Star, look at the home sections, those juicy new home ads, the consumer goods, and the debt, the banks, the financing. That's about 25%, 30% of, say, a newspaper's income. That's the largest identifiable segment of their income, and they know where their income comes from, and they editorialize appropriately.
Yeah.
So,
fair.
okay.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. That's very insightful. It shows connecting the dots there, and it's the same thing with these establishment politicians. Everyone, they're all stringed. Where do you think all their campaign money is coming from? A lot of it. A lot of donations, right, John? They're donating these parties to keep the status quo, to keep the high immigration, so the banks benefit, but the majority of Canadians are not benefiting.
No, when you look at the mentality, take the mayor of Barrie, very competent guy, very sharp, very competent guy. He's a developer. Okay, where is his mindset? His mindset is to build buildings. He's talking now about putting a convention center downtown. But Barrie has the least happy people of any metropolitan area in the country. And there's a direct correlation between the rate of growth of a town and the happiness of its people. There's also a correlation between the size of a city and the taxes that are paid. Also, back to invisible taxes, we have huge invisible taxes in this country in the form of an infrastructure deficit. We aren't building the infrastructure we need to service this expanding population. Toronto, the transit in most of our big cities is an absolute mess. Congestion is getting continually worse. And if we did actually spend the money to support the levels of population that we have, the inflow of immigrants, their taxes would be far higher, but we aren't. So the quality of service is going down in those areas.
Oh yeah, good point. And imagine all the money that would have to be spent, and this is just to create the basic infrastructure for these people.
It's hundreds of billions. It's hundreds of billions.
Unbelievable. This is what's happening to our country, everyone. It's just absolutely insane. I hope you're waking up tonight. Please wake up. And I'm going to get back to these questions. Michelle, she's saying there will be likely some new jobs of some kind to replace the ones missing by automation, but it's still narrowing trend of job opportunity in the future. Yes, Michelle, there's going to be some replacement, but there's been studies done, and they're saying potentially up to 50% of our jobs could be lost to AI and robotics. And we have a federal government that's pushing ahead with AI, everyone. They haven't consulted the Canadian people on it once, yet they're spending our tax dollars on developing AI in Canada to try and put us at the forefront of it. Can you believe it? What happened to democracy in our country, right? Have we ever had a national debate on mass immigration? It's been pushed down our throats for decades and decades using dishonest, false arguments, dishonest and dominating the discourse, as John elaborated, in these media corporations. And I'm going to, Carl Edward Fleury, he's got an excellent point here. And he's saying the money you spend on one immigrant here in Canada can actually help over 5 of them if they remain in their country, John.
I don't have any figures on that.
Yeah,
I'd say it's a lot more. I'd say it's a lot more. I'd say it's a lot more than that.
It's a lot more, yeah. Another thing, Carl, I'm going to touch on Carl's point here because look at the money we're spending, John. It's $35 billion plus a year. Imagine if we use that money to help our own people, to retrain them, everyone. Spending $40 billion. Forget that. Let's spend it on our own people. Let's retrain them. Get, the ones unemployed, let's get them back to work. Imagine that, John.
Yeah, I think we have to have a focus on that.
And that's what you're advocating, isn't it? To focus on our own people, to be fiscally responsible, to be frugal as Canadians? Because if we look at the whole world, what's happening? We're harming our environment. There's overpopulation everywhere. John?
Yeah, I mean, basically, people migrate from low per capita resource bases to higher per capita resource bases. That doesn't mean that we're sustainable in what we're doing. They're just moving from a bad place to a less bad place. And we have to send out the message that this has to stop. We have to address the problems in which they occur. Canada can't live in a vacuum, but we cannot absorb the problems of the world. We're going to have to step up and say, we're doing our part, and we need to start doing our part, because right now we're not. Our environmental record is terrible, despite whatever you might read. We have the second or third worst greenhouse gas emissions record in the industrialized world. And that's driven by 60% of it is more people, immigration, and about 30 some odd percent is the expansion of the oil sands. But in the GHG climate change coverage, they never mention population or immigration. It's always the big bad oil sands, and the oil sands are big bad, but they shouldn't be carrying having the whole can tied to their tail for this issue.
Of course not. Of course not. That's completely unfair. And, at the same time, we're taking tainted Saudi oil, John. Millions of barrels, right?
Yeah, in the East Coast.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to, I'm gonna get to Heather. She's saying Canada is in a bad way. And if we don't change who is in government, we will only be taken over, and we will be the minority in a few short years, John. We as Canadians have to wake up. And I'm going to refer to Dr. Professor Duchesne here. He made the case, John, that by 2100, Euro Canadians are going to be less than 20% of the population. So there is an ethnocide, a replacement apparently going on, John, which is related to the mass immigration.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's something I stay away from because of the rest of the case. Now, I would say the vast majority of immigration to be used to change the cultural or ethnic makeup of the country. I think that's probably the case. If I were advising, I'd say, change your metrics, focus on the welfare of Canadians, the sustainability of the land. And if you really think that Canadians want to change their identity, have a referendum and let Canadians speak to that specifically, because no study is going to tell you what to do. It should be a public question, and do it once and forget about it.
Exactly. And just so you know the history of Canada, everyone knows this. In 1971, Pierre Trudeau declared Canada multicultural and he actually went against reports that were done for the government that said we're bilingual. John, there was no discourse on this. The government top down just declared we're this. And just like the mass immigration, everyone, they haven't had a national dialogue. They didn't do a referendum on it. They pushed it on everyone. So we all need to wake up. You're getting used for these special interests and their profits. I'm going to turn to Carl here. He says the actual term would be economic migrants. The actual refugees can't make it into Canada.
But they are.
Pardon me?
Yeah, but they are.
They are getting into Canada, yeah.
One thing we don't have, and economic migrants, it's very tough to differentiate between the two, I think, now. Plus the fact you've got illegal immigrants, you've got some sizable population. I don't know how big that is. A number of years ago, the estimate was 200 to 700,000. I have no idea what it is now. But in effect, I mean, whether it's a temporary foreign worker thing, the government doesn't have a stat on that, by the way. pointedly avoid keeping
Wow.
a stat on that.
Wow.
So we don't know how many people are actually in the country legally or illegally, and I think that's deliberately fudged by the government.
It's probably more than they're saying, John. Didn't you say?
Well, they're not saying, and you can bet that they're going to
Yeah.
lowball it.
Exactly.
That they won't touch the issue. They won't touch any technically thorough examination of the impacts of migration. They just won't,
Yeah,
for obvious
exactly.
reasons.
Yeah, I'm just going to touch on what Carl said too. The current government changed the classification of economic migrant as well, John. Right now, it's been reclassified as foreign university students, foreign graduate students. So we're getting tens of thousands of these unemployed foreign students into our country, John.
Yeah,
Can you believe that? It's making it worse for our unemployed skilled workers. It's putting more pressure on them getting jobs. A lot of these students are working for cash and undercutting other immigrants that are trying to live honestly. John?
Well, you've got a surge of people competing for the same jobs. So you've got Canadian kids graduating. They're having a tough time getting jobs. It takes years now to become established in the workforce. And if you look at the government, was it the finance minister was saying Canadians need to get used to the concept of part-time work? I think the government needs to get used to the concept of supplying high-quality jobs, which they clearly don't have. They don't have that concept. So foreign students competing with our kids, they don't need that competition. And the other aspect of that is globalization. We're sending our best jobs. We have sent about 500,000 of our best jobs overseas with the free trade deals, okay, and the outsourcing. So that's another component that puts huge amounts of pressure on people at all levels of the workforce.
Yeah, incredible. It's just insane, the whole thing. But we're going to keep digging, everyone. Tonight's about digging and digging and exposing as much truth as we can. Please share this with everyone. We got to wake up Canadians, inform Canadians, and we got to break what's happening. This is probably at the forefront of what's happening to our country, John. This globalism. We call it globalism ideology that's being pushed on our country. And one of the main tenets of it is mass immigration, everyone. It's dividing us. It's putting us in conflict. It's causing employment stress. And, we gotta fight back and reclaim our country. And I'm going to turn to Betty here. She's sharing something here. I've been saying that for months for Canadians to wake up. I go to the mall in Edmonton and I can see the new people. Can't find Canadian people anymore. George Soros is running Canada along with the Muslim Brotherhood. We should all tell our employers not to take taxes out of our paychecks. The Muslims get free housing from our banks, never to have pay, yet we as Canadians have to pay through our noses. So there's inequality there, John. So some of these immigrants are coming in, they're getting all these perks and this and that, and the honest, hardworking Canadian is paying, up to 50% of their income.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Muslims.
Of course, it's not.
But it's the whole thing of now we're paying. The immigrants didn't come here necessarily to rip us off. I don't blame the immigrants. I blame the people who have corrupted the system and who are allowing this to continue. And as much as we show some poor immigrants living on social welfare who are doing okay while Canadians pay for it, there's another group there that never gets mentioned, and that's the people who are profiting from this. And those are the people you have to shine the light on.
Exactly, everyone. And that's an important point. We should never take any of this out on an immigrant. Obviously, if you're being attacked, your family's threatened, defend yourself, of course. But don't take out on an immigrant. They've been invited here. We need to focus on these establishment parties that are allowing it and these special interests that are benefiting. They're all benefiting. There's money going back and forth. John, it's not just the banks and and these real estate people, John. There's money going back into these parties.
Oh yeah, no, that's it. We don't have the breakdown on the interests that contribute to these parties, but developers are a huge source of campaign funds. And if you look at one interesting side thing, if you ever decide to look into trusts, the Trudeau Foundation, that started to get hundreds of millions of dollars after Justin Trudeau became the PM. And it was a few years before then, there was virtually no contribution, but he becomes prime minister, and you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Why? Who's giving that, and why are they giving it?
Yeah.
You know, I find it hard to believe that it's divorced from government policy.
Exactly, and no one gives money without something in return, generally.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly, everyone. And we have a policy on that, and it's a transparency and accountability policy on that. I'm going to get to Carl here. Thanks, Carl, for sharing your feedback tonight. He says it would be a lot cheaper to create a funding program that can help Canadians to populate way cheaper than immigration. 100%, Carl. And that's something we support, John. This mass immigration, everyone, it's costing $35 billion plus a year. Imagine what we could do for our own people with that kind of money. How many unemployed Canadians we could retrain. Imagine the stuff we could do in this country. It's unbelievable. But there's corporate interests that are benefiting. The establishment parties are benefiting because there's money going back and forth, everyone. We need to break this cronyism, this corruption. It's destroying our country. And I'm just going to get back to here. Carl, I went ahead there. Carl's saying another one. They want to get rid of the actual Canadian people and replace them with a population from third world countries. They are much easier to govern and dictate, John. They are already trained. So this is getting back to ethnocide and the trend to replace the founders, creators of Canada, the Euro Canadians. And this is happening. You can see it in Toronto. Toronto's now is about 50% non-Euro Canadian now, and that's dropping very fast. Put this all in context, everyone. And I think it was in the 1960s that Canada was about 97% Euro Canadian, and it's falling fast, John. This is a fact.
Yeah, I think you have to look at the powers that be, the interest groups that are pushing mass immigration, really couldn't give a damn what the color or ethnicity is. If the Irish still wanted to immigrate, or Swedes or Germans or Ukrainians, I mean, they take them in, but they aren't immigrating because their countries are getting better. Maybe not Ukraine, but you get the point. The only place they can fill up their housing developments, build those 180,000 housing units a year, pave over all the farmland, and have housing prices inflate and all that beautiful debt that they love so much. The only way they'll get the bodies to fill that is with third world, and they don't care what color they are. And Canadian culture is just collateral damage. They're not out to destroy it. They couldn't care less.
They couldn't care less, everyone, and that's what we've been saying for months. They have no allegiance to Canada. It's all about profit. And also for the government, we got to look at the government, John, too, and the establishment parties. It's about power too for them and control, getting more votes, dividing the population, right? And it's also feeding the media outlets which are supporting them, John.
Yeah,
so they're all in bed together.
Well, that's right. The parties, you don't get coverage. You don't get favorable coverage without making life profitable, creating a profitable environment for these corporations. And So when you have, say, the Election Spending Act, they can restrict spending, specific spending, but they don't count the millions and millions and millions of dollars of favorable editorial and coverage that media corporations give to people who make the country profitable for them and their advertisers.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm going to turn to Heather here. Thank you, Heather, for joining us tonight. She says, "Oh, Betty," she's because Betty was going on, John, about it's so hard to raise a large family.
Yeah.
She says, "I know what you are saying. I am here on the East Coast, and the same here. We know that's where our tax dollars are going." I think she's referring to all the immigrants, all the tax dollars going to them and catering to them, John. And you know, not all immigrants are bad that come to our country, everyone, but there are a certain percentage that do exploit our generosity, our health systems, our welfare systems, and this is a growing trend in Canada. What makes this worse, everyone, too, John, is the Canadian Multiculturalism Act, which was legislated in 1988, and it mandates the federal government to promote and enhance foreign cultures in Canada.
Okay,
So
I don't agree with that. I read the act, and what I believe the act said is that it recognizes that there were many cultures came into Canada and are part of the patchwork of Canada. It does not say, as it has been used, to say that we have to go out and change the cultural identity of Canada. It was recognizing the fact that, okay, it's not just British and French. Yeah, there are Ukrainians, Russians, Germans, Swedes, Italians, and it recognizes that fabric. But it does not say, as has been maintained by a number of, the mass immigration lobby, that there is a mandate to change the cultural makeup of Canada. So I think.
Well, we would argue that there is, because this country was predominantly bilingual, and now they're pushing multiculturalism. They've been doing it since the 60s, John, and now we would argue it's extreme multiculturalism. But if you look in that act as well, John, it says that they're mandated to protect and enhance foreign cultures in Canada.
Okay.
Excuse me.
All right. Anyway, okay, I'll have to look at it.
Yeah, just so you know that we actually looked through that act, and the government is spending millions and millions of our tax dollars to prop up these cultures. And Professor Duchesne talked about that in Canada in Decade, John.
Yeah. They might want to give them little bits of money to have the Hungarian festival in Wawa or something like that. But the way it's being used, misused, misrepresented, is that people are saying by law, and they point to the Multicultural Act, by law, we have to change the face of Canada. And that absolutely is not what it says. So it's the same, they misuse the aging argument.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And so it's all part of the same misdirection.
Exactly. And we can see the rise of ethnic enclaves in Canada, similar to Europe. We're not quite at Europe stage. Also, the ghettoization of Canada. It's coming, everyone. I think a lot of people are aware of it, depending where you live. Places like Mississauga, areas around Burlington, Brantford, Cambridge, Ontario. If you go out to Halifax, there's issues there. We can see parts of Calgary is like that, Edmonton, across this whole country. Look at Vancouver, what's going on there, everyone. It's basically being taken over by immigrants right now. And I'm going to get, there's a lot of questions here, John. So I'm going to turn to John Evans. He says, why are Canadians not asked about what we want? You know, I need as to this total unplanned flood of immigrants that do not even have checks for medical health and a criminal past. And not only that, John, they're allowing permanent residents with, fairly significant disabilities to become citizens.
The question is, why are Canadians not asked? And
Yeah.
they don't want to ask the question. I write, they're controlling the system for their own benefit, and they absolutely don't want this out in the public.
They don't talk about it. All they say to you folks, they say mass immigration. They don't even use the word mass immigration. They just say immigration is good for the economy.
That's right. That's
what
right.
They should be saying is immigration is good for the special interests, which are propping up the establishment parties. Right? Yeah. That's what they should say.
That to be accurate, yeah, but they don't make any money.
To be accurate, everyone. I'm going to go to this report, and then we're going to get back to these questions. I want to thank everyone for joining us. This is a report by the Health and Welfare of Canada. It came out in 1986, everyone. It says here, again, the OECD data reveal a very weak relationship between population growth and real GDP per person growth. Population growth explains less than 1% of change in growth in per capita in GDP. The relationship that exists is negative. More population growth is related to less per capita growth in GDP.
Yeah, that's exactly the point.
Look at that. More population growth, everyone, is related to less per capita growth in GDP. It means this mass immigration is lowering our per capita GDP. It's making your lives harder. Can you believe that? Here's an important finding too. The U.S. Commission on Population and the American Future, and this is way back in 1972. And it says here, we have looked for and have not found any convincing argument for continued national population growth. The health of our economy does not depend on it. The vitality of business does not depend on it. The welfare of the average person certainly does not depend on it. Can you believe that? That was back in 1972, John. Yeah. I got one other point I want to share here. It says here, immigration accelerates environmental degradation. And we can see that happening to our farmlands. They're getting bulldozed. They're putting up box stores, John, right? We're losing our agriculture.
That's right. And if you look at the, say, if the average the immigrant stream, when they come to Canada, their GHG emissions go up by a factor of 4.2. So that's an indicator of overall negative environmental impact. And of course, one of the most obvious things is plowing or paving over farmland, which is idiotic. You can't get any more idiotic than fighting hunger around the world than by bringing people in and paving over farmland.
Exactly. And here's this question here. That's a crazy amount to be paying for taxes when you make less than $12 an hour. And she's talking about the average 42.5%. Yeah. Look that up, everyone. Just Google it and you will see it. It's out there in the public domain. But yeah, it is a lot of taxes. We're basically tax slaves, and we're paying for the immigration system, everyone. And we're paying for all the welfare, the health burdens that are coming with, and we're not getting any real economic benefit to ourselves and our families. John, it does not make sense. We're harming our environment. It's harming the environments in the countries where they come from because they're draining smart people from their country, which they need in their country to help fix their problems, but they're taking them away. And then it's encouraging more population growth in those countries, John.
Yeah, well, I mean, overall, we have to stop. We can't continue to consume the way we've been consuming on the planet as a whole or in Canada. We can't continue to have the population grow. We have to start looking after the planet, and migration just spreads problems. It should be used as an indicator of problems. If people want to leave a country, then there's a problem. Deal with the problem at its source and recognize that the problems of the third world cannot be absorbed by the rest of the world, and also the developed world has to cut its consumption, and they have to stop exploiting the third world for its resources with virtually no benefit to the people of the origin lands.
Yeah, here's another report, everyone, I'm going to touch on. And this is in 1976. It was by the Science Council of Canada, report number 25. And it says exactly what you're saying, John. It's recommending that Canada should live frugally and avoid waste. And of course, Canada could never solve the problem of overpopulation, right? We're just a very small country, and we published on our page today, yesterday, the gumball video, which shows that it's minuscule, it's futile to try and address the overpopulation issue by taking in mass immigration. It doesn't make sense.
That's an excellent video.
Yeah, and you know what they recommended back then, everyone? They said Canada's future policy, by having the mass immigration, they said we got to live frugally. If we don't, we're going to restrict our policy options. We're going to constrict Canada's ability to act. And that's what's happening. Isn't it horrible what's happening, John? And that's that report there by the Science
It is. I think you have some of the reports you've mentioned have been produced by all the political parties back 40, 50 years ago. And since then, it's become, immigration has become monetized. It's identified as the means by which certain groups can enjoy phenomenal profits, and they've corrupted the entire political system. I think Nixon, one of the things you read was a report put out by some of Nixon's cabinet.
Yes.
Some of his departments. And so, it's not a right wing, or it's not a conservative or a progressive, whatever you want to call it, agenda. There's nothing, it's just common sense that any good government will apply. But it's been short-circuited, it's been taken over, and it's been rigged by the interests that make immense amounts of money from it.
Yeah, isn't it horrible? And I'm just going to get to these questions. They're just piling up, John, so I'm going to try and get through a bunch of them right now. Heather's saying, well, don't let them in. It's crazy. And I think that's a position, John, that you believe that we should stop immigration.
Well, cut it down to balanced levels, so there's as many coming in as going out. People leave countries all the time, and then so you're always going to have inflow and outflow. But so balance it. You want balanced immigration, and you don't want it driving the country, dominating the country, and driving it down the wrong path, which is what has been going on for the last 40 years. Yeah,
and see the frustration. Heather's saying that these people on welfare are making more money than she's making working every month, and this there's something wrong with that picture, and you can see the frustration. Here's Adam. I know what's going on is a disgrace. It's great. I guess Adam sees it. That's great. Share it, Adam. We're going to get to Michelle here. She says, according to the Economist, some countries are even looking at universal basic income as something to remedy the narrowing job market from automation. People may not need to work anymore. That's very scary. We're not going to get into that tonight. But there's been test pilots, Michelle, in Ontario. Can you believe it? And as far as we're concerned, this is connected to Agenda 21 and controlling people. Imagine living off the government with a basic income. They would have complete control over your life. But we'll have to deal with that on another day. Heather says, yes, keep our money here, help our own people, look at our homeless rate. We overlook them and give the people walking across the border a place to live, food to eat as soon as they walk across the border. Yes, we agree with you, Heather. The illegal migrants is connected to the mass immigration, but the mass immigration is mass immigration. And we don't support the illegal migration, and that's something we would, we would actually deport these people back to where they came from. They shouldn't be coming in here illegally. Yeah, we're doing the opposite. Steven says immigration can be good, but the right kind of immigration, they need to be able to support themselves for 2 years or be a millionaire or start a business to employ Canadians. They want to bring in relatives. They need to support them. As thinking of think it is as limiting child support to 2 children per family would save us millions, and that's something we have in our policy, Stephen. On that, we're not against immigrants, but this is out of control. What's going on? It's not only harming our country; it's harming the world, and that's what John argues in his article, which I'm going to get to soon. We're going to move up here. John Evans says, what is the justice system gone? We watched the RCMP help these immigrants just walk in, no check. They are so-called borders, no check as to what, who, what, why they are coming into our country. We are like Mexico 60 years ago, John.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, the numbers are increasing, and we just don't have a policy. We just simply don't. And the policy is, I think Trudeau made some really foolish statements, like we'll take all of the immigrants, we'll take all of these people. He can say that from the relative safety of a country in the position we're in, which is north of the U.S. You can't walk across a border from Afghanistan or Syria into Canada. And these countries don't have that kind of policy. All right, the surrounding countries don't have that kind of open door policy because it's totally destructive. So we have these mindless feel-good statements with no policy backup. And so the problem just keeps on getting worse. And in order for Trudeau, the government, to do something, he'd have to reverse himself and look very, very foolish. So I don't think we're going to see any tightening of the border anytime soon.
Yeah, exactly. And it's terrible. And thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to get to more of these questions. Adam saying Canada needs to shut borders and find out who is here and regroup. Yeah, we definitely, and that's something we support. Adam, is a temporary pause in immigration. Right now, it's 11 years in backlog and growing. And what a mess. But I guess Trudeau, John, he must be pretty high up in the esteem of these special interests and these bankers, for letting all these immigrants in, because they must be like their profits must be over the top thanks to him,
Yeah. Well, you look at who's making the money and the immense amounts they're making, and of course there's blowback, both foreign money and domestic money into his foundation, hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think they're showing their appreciation.
Exactly. And Michelle, excellent point. She says in Atlantic, Canada, they have immigrant pilot program, John. Employers in Nova Scotia can hire foreign workers and international graduates. But Michelle says, what about our graduates?
Well, that's it. There isn't, as I say. I mean, they try. Like immigrants are going to have a harder time getting jobs in Canada than native Canadians, and so they're trying to take what they probably know is a very bad situation and try and make it slightly better. But of course, they're directly hurting Canadians in doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And here's another example from Michelle. She said for new business loans, a Canadian citizen must pay back 90%, but immigrants only have to pay back 75%, John. I know this because I was asked if I was a Canadian citizen. So that's another inequality that's going on. Heather, I guess I'll, she's saying legal. I have friends in the Dominican Republic who has adopted a young girl, and because of all her paperwork was lost due to the earthquake in Haiti, and the adoption worker was killed in the disaster. This child is declared a stateless child and this Liberal government won't give them a TRP to come to Canada. This government would never have to spend a cent on this child. Go figure. Yeah, there's a lot of hypocrisy, Heather. There's a lot of hypocrisy. But the biggest hypocrisy, everyone, going on is that they're doing a brain drain from these developing countries. They're bringing mass immigration into our country. So they're actually harming our environment. They're harming our own people, but they're harming the country where these people came from, because it's not forcing these countries to deal with their overpopulation issues. So they're just going to keep populating. We're also taking some of their smartest people, but the smartest people should be left in their country to deal with their major issues in their country. So this is a complete hypocrisy. What's going on, John?
Well, it is, and it's a hypocrisy. But there's no plan. There's no focus. There's no metric to represent the welfare of Canadian people.
No, it's not.
And it's all deals. It's all political deals, backroom deals.
Yeah.
There's no consistency. So you can you can chase hypocrisies all day long. But what I think we should focus on is focusing on welfare of Canadians, health of the environment, and then build your policies around that.
100%, and that's why we say a temporary pause in immigration, a substantial reduction. But there is a plan in the establishment, John. The plan is to increase the profits of their special interest groups, the bankers, John. Yeah. That's the plan, and because that money's trickling back to those parties, and to provide disinformation to the Canadian people, keep them uninformed, and they're actually dividing our country, John. Because right now, the current government says we're in a post-national state. There's no distinct identity, heritage, or culture. We're all going to be divided, John. We're going to have ethnic enclaves everywhere as this mass immigration accelerates.
Yeah, well, that's
so there
collateral.
is a plan behind the government. We call it globalism ideology. And, Canadians are seeing it right now in their communities. And but there's a big fight ahead, everyone. And, we want to thank everyone for joining us. John Evans saying, let all Canadians understand that Canada has no government. We have a room full of wealthy hypocrites, liars, and ass. Not one Canadian has a say. And that's the bottom line. The Canadian people have never been asked about mass immigration. Never. We've been never asked about changing Canada into an extreme multicultural state. Never been asked. And that should just tell you volumes on what's going on. It's quite sad. And, these wealthy millionaires like the liberals and the conservatives tell us as Canadians what we want, not what we as Canadians what we need. And there's a lot of manipulation and disinformation, everyone, going on. And John touched on it in the media, the corporate media. And Heather says, yes, the money is going back and forth because they're all crooked. It's a revolving door to boardrooms as well. Have you noticed that when a government switches government, a lot of some of these MPs, they go straight into boardrooms, right? And then some of these corporations, they have positions in government, and that's what's happening to our country, and this is all wrong. It has to be about the Canadian people, our prosperity, our welfare, our well-being, our future generations. You can't be favoring certain groups. It doesn't work in the long run. This is complete corruption. It's almost like plutocracy, John.
Well, it's what happens in a society when they become the elite becomes detached from the interests of the regular people. Their interests are different from those of Canadians, and this is a typical sign of a society starting to disintegrate. And back through history, this is unfortunately typical, and the elite becomes detached What makes them wealthy impoverishes the majority of people, and the society ends up tearing itself apart.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
hopefully we can intercept that before it gets too bad.
Yeah, so I'm going to look at this last report tonight. I just want to touch on some main points. This is the report by John Meyer, who kindly joined us tonight. It's called International Migration, a Disaster Coming Soon. I'm going to touch on some of John's key points here. I won't touch on them all, but he says immigration rarely benefits the population in the receiving countries. The narrow elites excluded. And that's what's happening in Canada, everyone. This has nothing to do with the well-being of the Canadian people. And John goes on to say, he talks about, these are some of the impacts from the mass immigration, everyone. And it's been going on for decades and decades and decades. Loss of farmland, increased greenhouse gas emissions, increased stress on natural systems, ecosystems. Economic suppression of wage rates, low productivity, lower resource availability per capita. And we saw that in a number of reports. Higher per capita energy and resource costs, greater congestion and crime in society. Fiscal, lower tax revenue, higher social service costs, higher infrastructure costs, structural deficits. Social, increased inequality, increased debt, increased housing costs, lower quality jobs, increased social stability. We can see all these things going on in our society. And then he gave some examples. Some 95,000 hectares of farmland are lost annually. 80% due to immigration, everyone. 80% of 95,000 hectares annually that are lost. And John says Canada has the second lowest level of inequality in the world in the early 1960s. And now in 2016, we've gone from second in the world down to 20th. So we're heading into a more inequality Canada. These groups of globalist interests are getting richer and richer. And while most Canadians are less well off, that's what's happening in our country. John says immigrants are now tax negative to the tune of $30 billion annually. The cost of government, $30 billion more in service than they pay in taxes. So the immigrants are costing us $30 billion plus, everyone, than they contribute in taxes. In the past 40 years, personal debt has quadrupled in constant dollars. So we're turning into, this is good for the banks, John. And another thing, there's been huge increases in housing costs. Nationwide, immigration constitutes 80% of the demand for additional housing. So you can see and then John goes on to say immigration is now used to build the size of the commercial market. That's what's happening. This is all about the commercial market and profit. And he says rather than improve the welfare of Canadians and the health of the nation, immigration is critical to the wealth accumulation of the very narrow interests of developers, debt mongers, media corporations, and cheap labor employers. A growing commercial marketplace. That's what's happening, everyone. It pretty much sums up what's going on in our country. Thank you, John, for writing that article. You really hit things right on the spot there. Michelle says if you're going to allow more immigrants in, of course they are going to vote for the government that allowed them in, and that's what's happening. It doesn't matter who brings them in, and John, we lost John here.
No,
are you here?
Lost me. Yep.
Okay, fair enough. We're just going to try and get through these questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. John Evans asks, why does the mental, well, we're not going to call him that. Name calling is not good, John. He's going to receive, Trudeau's going to receive a half $500,000 pension after one term, John. And
I think that's peanuts. I mean, life as a politician is hell. I don't mind them getting a pension. What I do mind is, as you said, going out into the corporations they were going to control or legislate in favor of, and then they get their payback when they become a director, or in case of a foundation. As I said, Trudeau's foundation has received hundreds of millions of dollars, and I find it difficult to believe. I find it difficult to believe it's not related to some of the policies he's enacted.
Yeah, exactly. And John Evans talking about the taxes, the increasing taxes on Canadians, $4 for a pack of cigarettes, and then when you bring a carton back into Canada, you're paying what, $32 a carton of duty-free cigarettes, and they call it Canadian health tax. And this is what happened. All the hidden and the consumption taxes, John, they're only increasing. And you talked about the carbon tax. That's another exploitation, isn't it?
Well, carbon tax, I mean, I'm in favor of reducing carbon, and carbon tax might be an effective tool, but it's not a strategy. They talk about the carbon tax, but then they go out and increase the two things that are going to increase GHG emissions, which is mass immigration and the oil sands. And so what's the point? The carbon tax is just a window dressing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And and it's also hurting our families. It's putting more financial burden on them, and also our small business. And here's this, Anne's really upset. You can see what's happening with everything. She's saying 65 cents more for us seniors is a disgrace. Yes, it is, Anne. You know, many seniors are living in poverty, John. They can't make ends meet. The government has no money for them, but they have billions of dollars to flood this country with mass immigration. It doesn't make sense. Our people are coming last. These special interests, these bankers, these real estate people, these low-income employers are all benefiting, and the money's going back and forth. And she says, deport them. Anne says, deport them so they can't fix their own countries. You know, we can't fault them for coming in, Anne, but you're right. We shouldn't be doing the brain drain. That's just hypocrisy. We don't need their people. We have competent, educated people in Canada. We can retrain our Canadian people. And all these economic reports says mass immigration will not help our per capita GDP. We don't need them. Let them stay in their country and deal with their own issues. And that's something you support, John. That would address the overpopulation, the environmental degradation in their own country, at least help deal with it.
Yeah, it would be a signal at least, and we'd have to support it with foreign aid to get it going. But let me say one thing. The point about seniors and also ties back to cheap labor. I believe that if $20 an hour part-time jobs were going begging in this country, you would see a huge drop in, it would be a structural solution. You'd see a huge drop in senior poverty because you can, maybe they can work 12, 15 hours a week. You'd see a huge drop in prostitution because a lot of the women involved in that are drug addicts or low functioning. They cannot work 40 hours a week. But if they could work 15, 20 hours a week at a job that pays well, then they could get off the streets. So I think there's a structural solution, which is a labor shortage and invest in your people.
Exactly, but there's really no labor shortage because we got at least 8% unemployment.
Yeah, well, we'll always have that as long as you have a flood of cheap labor coming into the country.
Exactly. So excellent stuff. I hope everyone's getting this information, and please share it. We got to wake up more Canadians. This has to be about our people, our country. Enough is enough. Lila says, did you know Canada is getting refugees from Israel too, John? Um, I didn't know that. It wouldn't surprise me. I'm assuming these are Muslim refugees coming from Israel.
No, I think what it was is I think it was they were talking about Ethiopia. Weren't they talking about
Oh
Ethiopians?
yeah, exactly. The Ethiopian.
But I don't know if that's actually happening. But
We'll have to see.
The mindset of how would we possibly get involved in that.
Sure, exactly. Dominique says once you lose your institutions to foreigners, you are no longer a country. And there is there is an ethnocide going on. Euro Canadians are being replaced. This is one of the products of mass immigration, extreme mass immigration that's only increasing from decade to decade. And the bottom line, Dominique, is that we're being controlled by these special interests.
Well, I think one of the points Dominic might be hinting at is the fact with under globalism, we lose control of our resources, our labor laws, and everything else like that, so that we're just either a market or we're cheap labor in that system. We're just ground up in that system. I think he might be implying that you have foreign corporations, foreign interests controlling Canadian public policy.
Exactly. And that ties into the globalism agenda and turning us into a post-national globalist state, or, we call it a post-national globalist village, John, where we're all divided. There's no distinct identity, heritage, culture. And
therefore, because you don't exist.
Yeah, you don't exist.
You don't need any special treatment. They don't have to do anything for you. You're just a cog. So that's what it's boiled down to.
Yeah, that's what's happening, everyone, more and more. It's really sad what's happening to our country, but this has been going on for decades. We're really starting to see the evidence of what's been happening, and we don't believe it's too late, everyone, to correct this, but we need significant, profound change. We need leadership that is going to put our people first, our country first, that's going to have common sense, that's going to have sound, practical policies that puts our people first, but also supports all of humanity. This mass immigration is counter to all that. And Lou says it's trying to buy votes. You're right, Lou. Immigrants, when a government lets them in, they tend to vote for the government that let them in. So, both of these establishment parties that have been doing mass immigration for the same reason, to hold on to the power. And again, it's all about the special interest and the globalist interest. It doesn't matter whether conservative liberal gets in. It doesn't matter at this stage, because they're both supporting those same interests, everyone. And Bruce says employers get cheap labor, politicians get votes, and average Canadians get the bills.
Yeah, good statement.
Excellent statement, Bruce. That pretty much sums it up. Excellent statement. I'm going to read that again. Employers get cheap labor, politicians get votes, and average Canadians get the bill. And that's basically what's happening. Though you could add the bankers in there, John, and they're getting heaps of money from this.
And speculators
as well. Stephen Curry in New Brunswick here, you need to speak English and French to get a job. There's so much unemployment. Allowing immigrants in is just stupid, he says. And it doesn't make sense. It's putting pressure on the unemployed in a place like New Brunswick, John. And we can see this happening across the country. And remember the reports. Immigration is not good for our economy. There's no evidence of that. If anything, it's harming our economy. It's harming the Canadian family. It's harming small business in Canada. It's harming our environment. Our taxes are higher because of it. It does not make sense. Everyone, it's only benefiting these parties in power and the special interests that fund them. That's it. That's what's going on. Corrine says civil unrest, civil war It's also like Trudeau wants Canadians to die out, die off, so he can give all his illegals. Yeah. Well, it's not just Trudeau. This has been going on for a long time, Karine, and it doesn't matter which establishment party is in power. They still have the same overall agenda of a mass immigration.
And they don't want us to die out. They just don't care.
Yeah, it's
collateral damage.
Exactly. Yeah. It's as John says, they don't care whether we die out. They don't care about Euro Canadians. It doesn't matter.
Health of the market, health of the commercial market.
Health of the market, their profit margins, that's the only thing that matters. They don't care about Euro Canadians, who founded, who created this country. It's irrelevant.
Okay.
Who is John Meyer? Heather missed that. John Mayer's been studying. He's been studying for 45 years, population and environment, social metrics, which measure our progress in our societal development. And he, like I said, he's been doing this for 45 years. And we featured this article by him, recent article on mass immigration, and talking about its impact on Canada. Heather, Anne says, this is a very corrupt world. I love my country, but our country is very corrupt too, Anne. Not just the world, our country is corrupt. It's corrupt to the core. Ottawa's corrupt. Our best interests are not put forward. As John says, the Canadian people is just collateral damage. As long as there's more and more taxpayers, as long as there's more consumers in Canada, these special interests are happy. It is complete corruption with this Liberal government. I really hope we can get rid of the Liberals. Stresses me out every day. Marlene, it's not just the Liberals. That is a mistake. Look through the history. It doesn't matter which party's in there. It's the same agenda. Harper had his historic mass immigration. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers. Go onto our YouTube page, National Citizen Alliance. We got videos documenting the numbers. Michelle says, what are we going to do to increase our party? We're going to party coverage and presence. Obviously, we don't have the corporate media on our side, and Michelle, but we're going to be doing a tour in the Maritimes coming up. Please join us. Look up on our events page on Facebook. You'll see our events throughout the Maritimes. We're going to Montreal, and we're going to be doing more tours across Canada. This is a grassroots movement. The truth needs to get out. Everything we do costs money, so please donate to us to help us reach more Canadians. We're going to do, Lindsay says, what are you going to do as a party now? Continue to speak the truth, Michelle, and go out and meet the Canadians face to face. Also continue our social media. This is a process. We have more and more members. Change will come. We're on the right path. This insanity cannot continue. If you ever said to yourself, I wish someone would do something about these corrupt politicians, this is your chance. John saying, join the NCA to bring integrity, government, save our country. It's in dire straits. What is going on? John, it's a big issue. We're dealing with an entrenched globalist establishment in Ottawa. They're in bed with the corporate media, as John knows, and they're in bed with powerful special interests. That is what we are up against. It's not insurmountable. We need more and more Canadians on board to fight this. They're not listening. There's been report after report warning about the mass immigration, and they've turned away from it, as John knows. And you wonder why people are upset about all this immigration. This is Maxine. Yeah, it's only going to increase, Maxine, depending on the epicenters of where this is taking place in the major centers of Canada, places like Mississauga, Hamilton, other parts of Toronto. We can look at parts of Quebec. the Maritimes. You go to Vancouver, parts of the western provinces as well. It's all over Canada.
Can I make one point?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, California used to be, particularly for someone my age, used to be the shining example of what Western civilization could offer. The easy life, the Beach Boys, the Eagles, life on the beach, Hollywood, great life, great climate. It was always a place to be. But now California is number 50 out of 50 American states in terms of being a desirable place to live for Americans. So it's now the worst place, the worst state in the U.S., the worst quality of life in the U.S.
Wow.
They passed some of the most brilliant environmental legislation, but yet their carbon emissions are going up. Why is all this happening? It's because they've had this mass of cheap labor come into California. They can't afford their infrastructure because a huge percentage of the growth has been in cheap labor jobs. There's no tax base there, just a lot of social demand for infrastructure. So it's been, despite all the things they've done right, all of the leading positions they've taken, it's been the country, the state has been put into steep decline by being overwhelmed by just a wave of cheap labor. And you can't build a progressive society on that. And California is the best example.
Exactly. And Canada's not far behind as well.
Well, Ontario is right behind it.
Yeah,
Ontario
exactly.
is a great example.
Exactly. And you can see the penetration of these globalists and how much power they have. Heather's saying immigrants shouldn't be allowed to vote in our country for at least 5 years. 100%, Heather. Actually, in our policy, we say 10 years. That's, why not wait 10 years and then we can get to know them and how serious they are and how they're contributing to our country. So Brian says he's talking about the Trudeau Foundation like you, John. And he's saying, he's questioning about the proceeds of this money, and he's talking about all the irregulars that are coming in, and while the hardworking Canadian has to wait in line, right? And again, it's the inequality of our system. Smith says it's a globalist cult. It's pretty much a globalist cult. It's so arrogant, Smith, and that's what he's saying. But it's completely entrenched in Ottawa in these establishment parties. Money is flowing back and door. There's a revolving door into boardrooms, into government positions, and they're pushing a dishonest narrative on mass immigration in Canada that it's good for the economy. This is an absolute joke, but it's not a joke for the hardworking Canadians who are paying the price that as John showed in his article. Thank you. Close the border, she's saying. A lot of people are frustrated, John. We got to get this immigration under control. It's being pushed on us. If we continue with the establishment party, it's only going to increase everyone. They're getting so much money from these powerful special interests, and they're already bought and sold. John Evans says, thank you and I for our time. Very interesting stuff. Smith says seniors can no longer retire, including myself, after working 40 years, taxed to death. That is what's happening. I'm very sorry to hear that, Smith. And there's so many seniors in that position, John. They're living in poverty. They can't make.
It's not just the taxes. It's also the hidden taxes, like their mortgage payments and their debt costs. That's what's burying people. It's a whole wide range associated with what we've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And says our country is corrupt. I want a free Canada again to live in. Yeah, we're heading in the wrong direction, Anne. We're heading into a globalist village. We're all going to continue to be divided. There's going to be increasing ethnic enclaves. There's going to be no identity, no heritage, no cultural norms. Our values are going to be eroded. We're just going to be consumers and taxpayers. That's what's happening. And meanwhile, these globalist interests are just going to increase their profits. Again, as John said, this isn't about wanting to do malicious harm to the Canadian people. We're just collateral damage. They don't really care, basically. For them, it's all about profit and control. And Vicky says, John, Agenda 21, approved by the United Nations, that should be dismantled, the Club of Rome. And this ties into Agenda 21, John. And John,
I don't know what that is, so I'm sorry.
Agenda 21 is about the one world government, open borders, mass immigration, dividing societies, eroding the values and beliefs, stamping out any form of nationalism in like Canada. And that's you can argue that that's what's happening to Canada. And then tell your friends, John says, John Evans, tell the truth about what's happening to our country. The establishment parties are all in bed to this. Canadians needs this cancer removed. Yes, please share our conversation tonight. This is really the truth of what's happening to our country. We need to get this message out, and don't believe what's the corporate media. Do not believe the mainstream media. You're just being molded. You're being misinformed. It can be subtle, and such things. The constant narrative, immigration is good for Canada. It's good for the economy. This is nonsense. And Michelle says so much of the immigration and diversity beliefs are being taught in our public schools. Yes, 100%, Michelle. My daughter graduated 2 years ago from high school, is now starting to think for herself and realize the indoctrination that took place in the school. She is listening tonight by her own choice. That's fantastic, Michelle. Congratulations to your daughter. Great on her to have an open mind to see outside of the indoctrination. John, that's very positive.
I think
Michelle, but it's all in our institutions. There's political correctness that's tied in. Islam is being used to divide us. We encourage our members and supporters not to get caught up in that, because that's just a diversion. We have strong policies against radical extremism, but remember, these immigrants are invited into our country. You should be taking your frustration out on the establishment parties and the special interests. Just remember that. Do not take it out on any immigrant. They've been invited to our country, and that's just it's just not fair to take it out on them. John?
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a narrative being offered by the media, but they never cover the impacts. They never connect the dots. All someone has to do if they want to learn, like was it Michelle's daughter?
Yeah.
Okay. Why are we paving over all the farmland? Why are our emissions going up? Why is our productivity low? Why is there more congestion in the cities? All these factors, there are just dozens of impacts, and they're not being addressed by the media. They may talk about, it's too bad we're paving over our farmland. It's too bad our emissions are going up, but they don't say why. And I think the average person, when they're exposed to this concept, it becomes pretty obvious very quickly why. But you have to get through the mentality, the brainwashing, if you will, the channeling that the media's sort of imposed on us over the last 30 or 40 years.
Exactly. There's a lot of brainwashing, conditioning, and some of them, coming out of these establishment parties and the media, is that immigration is good for the economy. This is false. And we've tonight we've gone through a number of reports disproving that claim. We believe mass immigration is harming Canada in so many senses. and we need a temporary pause, a substantial reduction. That's our policy on that. And some more indoctrination is that Canada is a country of immigrants, John. That's another classic indoctrination myth. And I think that's something you touched on in your report, isn't it?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little briefly about that?
Okay. Well, Canada was founded by a couple of pulses of immigrants from Europe. Very desperate people. Only very desperate people migrate, and certainly the French peasants who migrated here, I think about 15,000 of them in the 1600s, were desperate, and as were the English colonists. So we had these pulses. Now, once you take a group of people and put them on a very rich resource base, they tend to multiply. Population tends to grow very rapidly, and that's what happened. Quebec, basically, the vast majority of their population grew up from that 15,000, actually 5,000 went back, so that the 10,000 that stayed. That you're talking about a doubling every 25 years or so. And so out of that, you get 6 or 7 million Quebecers. And at the same time, we were exporting people from Quebec and from Lower Canada and or Upper Canada, Ontario, and the Maritimes, because we were having so many kids. If you're brought up on a farm with lots of food, we just tend to breed. That's human nature. And so we were exporting people to the Americans. They were taking jobs in the American factories. They were going out west in the U.S. And so most of the time, Canada was exporting people. And we never depended, aside from the initial pulse of colonists, we never depended on immigration to build this country. And when we did take in immigrants, they were put in places where Canadians didn't want to go, like the prairies and maybe a couple of other areas, because they were less desirable. So that was a strategic reason. Now, since the 1960s, we have immigration to expand the economy, not for national welfare, not to make the Canadians or the country healthier or more stable, but just to build the commercial economy. And that's a huge change from the founding forces which created the country. And let's also say that when Europeans moved to the Americas, they colonized the Americas. 40 to 90 million Amerindians, the natives in North and South and Central America, they died off over about 150 years. So we did not move into an empty space. We colonized it, and we effectively destroyed those civilizations that had been here before through disease, war, genocide, and just displacement. So immigration, while a victory for us, and it's the media romanticizes the struggles of the immigrants, it came at an immense cost to the indigenous people.
Yeah, excellent stuff. So you can see the false narratives people going on. I'm going to deal with some more of these questions, and then we're going to get our closing statements tonight. I want to thank everyone for joining us. You know, what a great issue to look at. This is one of the major issues our country's facing. And can you believe it? There's no national dialogue going on. Hopefully today that we can at least get something rolling on this and get Canadians talking about what's happening to their country and why they're not consulted, why they're not given a voice on these issues. Stephen Curry says, us seniors are living on half the minimum wage each month. Electric prices confuse me, as when we finally get electric cars, we won't be able to afford to charge them up. You know, our seniors are so struggling, John. You know, there's over 600,000 plus who are living in poverty. It's probably 1 million. And yet we don't have enough money from them. We're spending billions and, 35 billion plus to bring more immigrants into our country. who are not helping our own people and who are not helping our per capita GDP. It does not make sense. The only thing it makes sense for is these corporate interests and establishment parties. I might go ahead, John.
Just one piece of math. Say we assume that we're losing. The immigrants are $30 billion tax negative, and say there are 1 million Canadian seniors in very tough straits. If all of a sudden the 30 billion went to the seniors, that would work out to about $30,000 per senior.
Can you believe that, everyone?
I mean, do the math.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of money. I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm just saying that's
one
the
thing
magnitude.
we could do, everyone.
Yeah.
We could give all our seniors $30,000 instead of just
Don't
growing
run on that. Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, you can see the impact. No, we have about $35-40 billion to help our own people. There's a lot we can do.
Yeah.
Michelle says Canadians are to be loving and caring. However, we need to take care of ourselves first. Yeah, Michelle, another thing is traditional Canadians are under attack. We're called racist, white supremacists. We're called anti-immigrant. This is just part of the globalist agenda. It's a push down the majority population. It doesn't make sense. We just posted a thing on Ryerson this week where they're having a course, a whole program, John, on white privilege. And again, pushing down Euro Canadians. It's all wrong, Michelle. They're even trying to make us all guilty. Yet the average Canadian is a hardworking, generous, thoughtful person, and who wants to do the right thing. And yet we're being framed as racist and Islamophobic and on and on. It's all wrong. Gary's upset. He wants to send these people back. We feel your frustration. And Heather goes on, John, you can't get in touch with anyone in Ottawa because no one cares up there. No, when one speaks out against Trudeau, they get the boot. Now they're independent. I hope they join in with you. Thank you, Heather. It's the same with any other party. You got to follow the party line. If you don't, you're gone. That's the way they control, and that's the way they control the Canadian people. There's so many tentacles to this control. We got to dismantle it all. We got to get this country focused on our own people and our prosperity and doing what's right. And John has a lot of good ideas in his article, which he touches on. And Belinda says, Bubble, this is what our president has been telling we, the people. The MSM is filling us with so much fake information. So much fake information, everyone. It's great that you joined us tonight. We provided you with a lot of facts. Here's Kurt, John. He says his monthly pension works out to $5.50 an hour. Can you believe that? $5.50 an hour. Marlene says they were settlers, not immigrants. There's a difference. Yeah, we would argue too that the first people that came to Canada, they were settlers, they were pioneers, Marlene, and they actually founded what it is to be Canadian. And as John Meyer just pointed out, because of the high fertility rates, they were integral to Canada. They were part of Canada. They lived off the land. They created this country. And that is a fact. And it's amazing what John said, everyone. We were actually exporting people back in pre-Confederation to the U.S. Yeah. Can you believe that? Yeah. And they try and push in our schools and the government rhetoric that, that we had all these immigrants coming and we're just a country of immigrants, right? They're just trying to push that narrative on us. Heather's here. I'm from Newfoundland, and I wish they never joined Confederation back in the 40s when they did. But then again, that was before my time. Man, to turn back the time, I bet it would not have happened. You see the frustration of people, John. They're so upset. They see what's happening to our country. And
there's frustration, but corruption happens everywhere.
Yeah. Thank you for your support, Heather. It's all about the truth for us. We're not tied to these globalist interests. We're just like you. We're fed up, and we're going to keep speaking the truth. And the more numbers we have behind us, the more impact we're going to have. And we want to thank John for joining us tonight. You've been great, and thanks for sharing all your insight and your dedication to our country. 45 years, that's a true commitment to our country. That's a lifelong commitment. And you must be really frustrated at what you see happening.
No, this is business as usual. I just have to say that it's been a lot of fun, and we can't grow forever. We have to stop growing, but we can progress forever. If
Exactly.
You do that by investing in people.
Exactly. Investing in our own people, protecting our environment, and protecting our culture, our heritage, our identity, our values, our way of life, everyone. This is what's at stake here. If this globalism agenda, we're just going to turn into this post-national globalist village. That's what's coming. Thank you, John, for joining us. He's from Welland, Ontario. Heather, I'm 110% with you. Thank you, Heather. It's great to have Canadians like you who are awake and you see what's happening. It's very sad, and unfortunately, we're going to have to close this thing down tonight. And God bless. Belinda says, Canada, may we all take our country. Yes, we got to take it back. And John, do you want to have some closing remarks? Just something brief you want to share?
Yeah, I think we just have to continue the conversation, and people have to ask fundamental questions like, why are these things happening? And connect the dots. Point out the impacts of migration, and people pick up on it. People know this. It doesn't work. These arguments don't work on if you work for for employees of media corporations. But the national debate has to take place among ordinary people, because it isn't happening through the corporate media.
Yeah, 100%, everyone. And, I'm not going to, I don't have anything else to say tonight. We've shared all the facts. We're against this mass immigration. We have to stand up for our identity, our heritage, our culture of our people. We need a pause in immigration. We need a substantial reduction. It has to be all about the Canadian people and our welfare, and also our children's welfare and their children and so forth. That has to be the focus. And right now it's not. And, we have to rise up and take power. And Stephen, we're not going to get it. The values we're talking about tonight, Stephen, are there's a lot of values of Canadian values we're talking about. The fundamental one is freedom. There's privacy values. We have no privacy in Canada, which is connected to the mass immigration. We're talking about our hard work ethic of Canadians. That's another value. Our traditional family union. That's a principle that we support. And we're going to have a discussion on values as well, Stephen. I'm glad you brought that up. We're at the end of 2 hours now, so we can't keep going. But I have to stress this. There's so many great comments tonight. Rick says we'll never regain sovereignty with the central banks in charge. 100%. Look at our policies, everyone. We have something on the bank as well. And you're totally right about that. Belinda says absolutely, Mr. Meyer. So your words are resonating with them. And next Tuesday, everyone. Next Tuesday, you have to tune in. We have 2 environmental experts on climate engineering that are going to be on this Q&A. Please tune in. These people are inspirational. They're well-read. They're environmental researchers, and they're gonna show another side of this globalism agenda of what's happening to our people. Please tune into that. That's going to be amazing Q&A next week. Our voices must be heard to save our country. Lots of great information. Yeah, I want to thank everyone. Thank you, John, for taking time. And we're going to have you on again. Great work on your part. 45 years. That's, what dedication to our country, right? And that, and that's not for financial gain. That's because you care about our country, John.
Yeah, it's a financial loss.
Yeah, financial loss. So it's our pleasure of us to have you on tonight. I want to thank everyone for all your questions. It's been a great evening. Please share this. And, we're going to do more and more Q&As. And in fact, we're going to have to do one on Canadian values and principles. And that's going to be coming up. We want to hear from you about that because we need to protect them. I want to wish everyone a great night. Thank you for joining us.